Hey guys, welcome out to the Community, the podcast devoted to home service businesses and those who desire to make an impact while making an income. Each week, you're going to hear real stories from real people who decided to do it their way and start a business. Yeah. Beautiful thing.
It's beautiful. And today's guest, this conversation that we get into all the time as far as like, how do you have Christ-like character inside of a company, or how do you mix ministry and a business, or business and mission? You know, do they go along? And today we've got an expert. I really would call him an expert on
He's a G. He's a total G unit.
and so if you're tuning in, if you're trying to decide if you want to watch this or not, this audio video is for anybody that is processing, how do I make Christ like preeminent inside of my business? How do I surrender my business from being mine to it being God's business, and I'm a steward of it? And so we're going to talk a little bit about some of the habits and some of the way that we work that out. But before we get into it, did I share with you how Darren and I ended up coming to know each other?
I don't think so.
It was at the exact same time that Upflip reached out to me. And so Upflip reaches out about video courses and filming, and of course we're geeking out. And I'm also trying to think through this ministry in the marketplace. So like where we're at today is not where we were when we started the business, but as we've hammered out the frameworks of what does it look like to be intentional.
Hammering.
Like really, what does it look like? And I still feel like we're on a journey to figure that out. I've got some questions I'm going to ask Darren today, but I feel like he was an integral part in helping me shift my framework to understand that business actually can be on mission. Yeah, which is an important question to ask. And if there's an answer that says yes, why would I want to own a business that wasn't on mission for what God's about?
Yeah. So if you're here and you know us, if you're here for home service, if you're here to learn sales, marketing, so on and so forth, you know us. You're going to leave with a lot more than that today to identify good whys and good mission vision to have. This dude is a stone cold killer, man. He was a captain in the Air Force. Did you know that?
Let's bring the killer into the room.
Let's get him in here.
Hey, Darren, welcome to the show.
Well, I don't know about killer, but they did teach us that what we do in the Air Force, I learned this very early on in ROTC, that we break things and kill people. So I guess technically that is the mission of the U.S. Air Force. But,
there you go.
I didn't do a lot of that firsthand. Not a lot of it.
Darren, can you confirm a lifelong question for a lot of people? In the military, I've heard that the diets are different among branches. So I'm pretty sure that Marines usually veg out on things like crayons or erasers, and the Air Force sits down in their chow hall with ribeyes and mahi, whatever, ahi tuna. Is this true?
I will say I've never met somebody who served in another branch of service that said, you know, I'm so glad I stuck with the Army instead of the Air Force. They always say, man, I wish I would have joined the Air Force. That's almost the first thing I hear from fellow veterans.
Oh, man, that's awesome.
Well, welcome to the show. And today we are going to get into a little bit of your story, a little bit of what you do or how you got into the role that you serve now. And so, but before we get into that, the first question that we always ask is a tough one. And it is, who is Darren Shearer?
Well, it's Shearer. And I'll say my ancestors, from what I understand, go back to Scotland, and we sheared sheep. So if you think about it, just like shearing a sheep, Shearer. So who am I? I'm a son of the Lord, right? Son of God, and not the Son of God, but just
one of them.
Yeah, one of them. Yeah, and I'm a father, and I've got a husband, and I've got 3 strong, godly young boys, and we're in the ages 5 to 10 range.
Oh, wow.
So a lot of excitement, and we live here in the mountains, and our boys just love it here, and getting out in the creeks, and even took up fly fishing since we got here. So I love the great outdoors here. And I'm also extremely passionate about discipleship. And so I took a course back in seminary called Biblical Models of Discipleship. Now, seminaries are wrestling with a lot of questions that nobody in the culture is asking, quite frankly. But that one on discipleship really resonated with me when I realized, okay, I can see the purpose in what we're doing in the Christian life. It's to go and make disciples. That's the Great Commission, right? Go and make disciples. It's not even necessarily to go and make a profit or go and plant churches, although those things are important. It's fundamentally about going to make disciples. And I have found no better place to do that than in the marketplace. And so I've given a lot of my time and energy over the last really 12 years into exploring what that means.
Hey, I appreciate you opening up like that. And I was about to write a question down, but because you stopped, I would like to ask you the question, why is there a battle, or why does it seem that there's a battle between church planting and disciple making?
Yeah, it's funny. I also took a church planting class. And so a lot of the guest speakers they would bring in would be from mega churches and, big churches over in other countries. But then they had the simple church guy come up. I don't know if y'all are familiar with the simple church movement, but the focus is on house churches. And the first thing he said to this group of probably 40 church planting students was, where in the Bible is the commandment to go and plant churches? And everybody just kind of struggled. We're like, we know it's in there, just where is it? And it really is not, that specific mandate is just not there. There is a biblical model for planting churches, but in terms of an express mandate, you just won't find it. And his point was, the mandate is to go and make disciples. And so, whether you need to go get your legal entity incorporated and 501c3 and all those kinds of things are sort of additional things that have come into play to advance the mission to make disciples. But I think that's I think when we recognize that the Great Commission is to go and make disciples, things are the way that we invest our time, the way we invest our resources, things really ought to get a lot more focused. And that I think the tension is when it becomes about the growth of that church at that specific address and more bigger budgets, bigger buildings. Those things I think have created a lot of tension as we've lost sight of really what our primary objective is as Christians.
Hey, I'm going to interrupt for a second because we've got a phenomenal opportunity for you. If you've been thinking about opening your own pressure washing company, I'd like to invite you to a free webinar. There we'll talk about the pros and cons of opening a pressure washing, and you'll get to chat with our team about whether or not you should launch a pressure washing company in your city or not. To register for this free event, go to pressurewashingpastor.com, scroll down to the little registration button, it's blue, and click on it, and we'll take care of the rest. I look forward to seeing you there. Have a great day. Now back to our show. So you're not anti-planting churches. You're not anti-becoming a EIN or a for-profit, nonprofit. What you are for is, what can we exactly do as it relates to making disciples, is what I hear you saying.
Yeah. I mean, I personally believe that where we ought to be making disciples is where the people are. And where are the people? Well, 85% of the Christian workforce, 85% of the working age disciple makers, where do they spend the majority of their waking hours? It's in the marketplace. It's in a for-profit company. And I say 85%, that's for the US, and the rest being in the social sector, public sector, overseas, where they don't have these massive social sectors and public sectors. virtually everybody's in business. So either disciples are going to get made in business or they're not going to get made at all. And plus, that's where all of the lost people are. They're not coming to church, but they're going to work. And there you have an opportunity to model the Christian life. And Paul says, imitate me as I imitate Christ. I think that's the best, at least just for my brain and understanding what is discipleship.
Yep.
That's what it is. 1 Corinthians 11:1, imitate me as I imitate Christ. And I can't do a lot of imitation of, so if I'm going to imitate my pastor, what am I going to become? A pastor. I'm going to feel like I need to go to seminary. I'm going to feel like I need to go do the traditional, church planting model. That's going to be sort of like the first option, and then everything else is sort of a distant second option, which is why we have this mindset that pastors and, they're really sort of the first class Christians or the clergy. Everybody else is the laity, which really is not even really a biblical concept, right? Because we're all saints. So.
That's good. Like, ask you one question and you almost get like fired up on some conversations. I was almost going to ask you a question of like, what would you burn over as it relates to your position? That is often what you butt up against inside of frameworks of conversation, because I'm assuming as you've done this for a while, there's some topics that continue to come up, and it's like, is there a certain argument or is there a certain thing that just fires you up when it comes to this conversation between the way that we do church growth, the way that we make disciples inside the church, and then the way that you see a biblical framework of making disciples?
Yeah, well, one of the issues is this issue of spiritual gifts. And as I understand it, spiritual gifts are the disciple-making tools the Lord has given to the church. And so we have one camp that believes that spiritual gifts have ceased. And so I don't really know what to say to those folks. And then we have another larger camp that if they believe that spiritual gifts are for today, they're just sort of for the congregational setting. And so, for example, you take a gift like administration, and Paul says this is one of the spiritual gifts, right? At what point do I stop using a spiritual gift and start using a natural ability of your natural talent? We talk about gifts and talents because we feel like we need to make that distinction. It's at what point do I stop using a natural ability and I step into using a spiritual gift? And a lot of people would say, well, if you're counting the offering, for example, you're using a gift of administration. If you're running a business and doing payroll or something like that, you're just using a natural ability. It doesn't become a spiritual gift until it's used on the church payroll or it's used in a church sort of a program. And I think that has a lot to do with why the church is so disempowered, because if I'm not using let's say my gifts are, well, which they are, some of my most prominent ones are administration, encouragement, pastoring, mercy, service, all of these gifts, as I understand it, are primarily, they're part of who we are once we are born again. And that's one of the major distinctions. If you're not born again, you don't have spiritual gifts. Your abilities are motivated and fueled by something. It's just not the Spirit of God. And I understand there's this idea of common grace and that the Lord has given abilities to everyone. It rains on the just and the unjust. The Lord gives that rain. He gives those gifts because he's a good God. But I think that's a big issue that I've really tried to address. Because when you take a spiritual gifts assessment, what is typically the purpose what is typically the motivation behind somebody that administer it?
Yeah, I've given them, and it was for one purpose, to figure out where they're going to serve,
where they're going to volunteer
inside the church service, because God wants them to use their gift to grow God's kingdom. And the logical conclusion inside the framework of this local ecclesia is that we need someone to run the children's wing. We need someone to scale this different thing. And as I say that, I do want to make sure that we're not for me, I'm not throwing a snowball, because God uses in my opinion, the church to reach people, but we may not have everything exactly correct as it relates to a sending church versus what would you call that? A sending church versus
Yeah, I mean, one illustration that I've heard, and we were talking about cruise ships earlier, is a cruise ship versus a battleship, or a cruise ship versus an aircraft carrier, where the church is really sort of like a place from which the mission is deployed, and the troops go out into battle and come back to get refit and refed and all those kinds of things. I think the church can, and I don't even know if that's overstating the role of. And when I say church, when we say church, we're talking about a legal entity, 501c3, something that the first century church knew nothing about. We're not necessarily talking about the big C church, but as I really focus on marketplace ministry and the overall disciple making mission, I'm thinking more in terms of the big C church. And again, there's a role for the local church. Absolutely. And I'm not against 501c3s, not against having a legal entity and having a board and all of those kinds of things. But, and this is another issue, to go back to your previous question that kind of set us down this line of thinking. Another major problem is the economic models that fund the discipleship.
Right.
And so, you go back to Luther, what really set off the Reformation was when he put his finger on the economic system of the Catholic Church. And then that just sort of, brought up the whole issue of the priesthood of all believers and, everything else that just kind of erupted out of that question of, maybe we shouldn't be charging people for the forgiveness of their sins. I don't think we're at that point. I mean, I think we still do have churches teaching people that if you're not giving 10% of your income, not to the Lord and through, maybe a variety of disciple making endeavors or charitable endeavors, kingdom endeavors, but if you're not giving 10% of your income to this specific 501c3, you are in sin. And we still do have a big subculture in the church that's teaching that.
If you didn't know by now, we have created the #1 video courses on starting and scaling a pressure washing company on the market.
That's right. But head knowledge will only take you so far. You need the hands-on experience.
So what we crafted for you guys is an Experience Nashville 3-day boot camp. 2 days in the field, learning everything as it relates to pressure and soft washing and how the systems work, and 1 full day of breakout sessions with Joshua and myself. Visit pressurewashingpastor.com, scroll down till you see a link to my calendar. We will grab a call together and figure out how to get you here to Nashville.
And then we will see you in Nashville.
Back to the show.
Now, for our listeners, if we've got some that aren't as advanced, maybe starting their stages inside of their faith, would you help me understand your perspective of the difference between a natural gifting and a spiritual gift, and how does one identify what their spiritual gifting actually is?
Yeah. So to go back to something I said earlier, that if you're not born again, you don't have spiritual gifts. So when you're born again, the Lord gives spiritual gifts, entrusts spiritual gifts to you, but they're given to the church. They're given through you by the Holy Spirit to the church for the building up of the church. And that, again, that's not necessarily so we can build bigger buildings, have bigger budgets, all those kinds of things, but toward the disciple making agenda, mission of the church, but is for the purpose of spreading the awareness of God's glory throughout the earth, which must go beyond just our Sunday morning houses of worship.
Right.
It's got to go into our everyday life.
Which is kind of this whole idea behind ministry in the marketplace. And if you're still talking to this same person, how can you know when you're actually operating in your spiritual gifting that is furthering the kingdom? And how do you know that without knowing I'm just good at this thing?
Yeah. Another criteria, as I understand it, is that they are fueled by the fruit of the Spirit. So if you have if you're using an ability that is motivated by selfish ambition or greed or fear or, all of these things that are just not of God, then I think you're operating in the flesh. And so, the question of, as a believer, am I using a spiritual gift of administration or a natural ability of administration? Some would say, well, only if you're using it in the church is it really a spiritual gift, or in a congregational setting. I think so. When I go to work and I use administration, am I just operating in the flesh? I think that's the only alternative. Like, you're either operating, if you're a born again believer, look at Romans chapter 8. You're either walking by the flesh or walking by the Spirit. And what is the flesh? It's the sin nature. It's, you can use, I'm sure many of the, Forbes 400 richest people in the world have incredible gifts or abilities of leadership, administration. They're not all believers. A lot of them aren't. So what is it fueled by? In most cases, it's what are you left with? If you're not a believer, you're dead in your sins and trespasses. That's what the Bible teaches. And the only, real motivation you have is your flesh. And God, through his common grace, has a way of redeeming those things to where, can a super ultra rich person give to go help fight AIDS in Africa? Even if he's not, directly given the glory, like he will still do that. But I think when you look back on the previous week or the previous day, where did God get the glory for me using that gift? And it doesn't mean that, all of a sudden everybody in your office just fell down and said, what must I do to be saved? First of all, that that you're operating in faith, because without faith, it's impossible to please God. That you're using your gifts and you're using your business not as an idol to yourself, but as an altar of worship to God. So everything you do in business is now an altar of worship to God.
Yeah, I feel like we need to transition into that, because if I'm a business owner and I'm processing this, chances are, if I'm a Christian business owner, I go to a church that has maybe some of this philosophy or teaching. And are you calling it like evil? Are you calling it misleading? What would be because I'm also processing with that person that, man, I'm a Christian, I go to a church, I tithe, I kind of think, we should be using our gifts and talents to serve the local church. How do we transition that thought or framework, or invite and move into, without dividing into, hey, you've got a business. Is it yours? Are you using it for self, or are you using it for the glory of God? How do you transition and bridge that gap?
Are you talking about from the perspective of church leaders, or the perspective of the business leaders?
So this is what I'm thinking about, is like, if we have an audience, it's either, a church org that is checking it out, thinking about maybe starting a home service business to support a church plant or disciple making, or it's a business leader who has a business and is curious about using their business to make disciples. But you may have lost me in the middle of with what church culture is kind of creating as a infrastructure of not sending and equipping and for the work of ministry being something other than the ministry of that local ecclesia. How do we help the listener that is like, I have a business, I would like to have a conversation of what it looks like to have Christ in it or to make disciples? What's the beginning?
What's the starting point
conversation there
of how they start that?
Yeah. I think first of all, wrestling with this question of what is the fundamental purpose of business. And, and if I feel like the fundamental purpose of business, and this is what most business people think of it as, is to make money to fund kingdom advancement, or to give to real ministry. And that I sort of just do the necessary evil of business so that I can give to real ministry. And I think when they think of real ministry, it's what's modeled for them. And it's pastors, preaching behind pulpits, this kind of thing, and losing sight of the fact that you are a pastor. Josh, you're the pressure washing pastor. Like you recognize that as a business person, my primary responsibility as a minister, and we are all ministers, is to the people that I work with. And you might not be the CEO, but I use the term Christian business influencer, because you wouldn't be on the payroll of that company if you didn't have some level of influence in that company. And so I think it first has to start with that paradigm shift, as I had when I was actually in the Air Force. I was leaving the base to go do some volunteer work, because at that time, young single guy, I was doing the deal when it came to serving my local church. Like I was on the music worship team. And I like to use that phrase, music worship team or music team, because when we say worship team, it sort of implies that this is what worship is.
That's
worship
good.
is 3 songs, and that's kind of what really worship is about. And I was leaving the base. I was volunteering at the racetrack casino. They have a horse race track there, and a chapel, and I was one of the staff there at the chapel on Tuesday nights, doing street evangelism, just doing everything I could do. My dad's a pastor, and I sort of grew up with this perception of what ministry looked like. And I was leaving the base on this one particular day, and I'll never forget the Lord speaking to me and saying, "This base is your ministry." And that was the moment I really had the paradigm shift to recognize that it's not necessarily just about making money to give to the other people, because that can be an abdication of responsibility. But that I have a responsibility to serve the people around me and represent. I mean, like D.L. Moody said, one person will read the Bible, the other 99 will read the Christian. And you're the only Christian that most people are gonna see. And so it has to start with that recognition that wherever you spend the majority of your time, that's where you're called. That's the first place you're called to minister.
Yeah. And so just to put it down, a paradigm shift is when you were thinking one way and things shifted to a new perspective. And so if you're listening or if you're watching and you're thinking about your business, you're thinking about, are you the owner, or is God, do you use it for your glory or for his glory? To have a paradigm shift would ultimately mean you've seen it one way, and now it's starting to look at it from another perspective. And what I hear you saying, Darren, is we're trying to invite people into a conversation to process this idea of, are you using your gifts inside of the local church to grow it, or are you using your gifts inside of your business to further the kingdom or the gospel? Is that kind of what one of the conversations you're trying to introduce?
I think there's a tithe principle at work there. We certainly need to be giving our time, resources to our local church. But sometimes it can be easy to feel like I've done enough. I showed up on Sunday morning, I put something in the offering plate, and that's me and God, we're good. And God is wondering when we're going to step out and be the church in our own spheres of influence. And so for business in particular, this is another facet of it, is that, so disciple making is the order of the day. Culture makes disciples. The Holy Spirit works through culture to make disciples, because the CEO, your coworkers, the products, services, everything will come and go. Everything else is interchangeable. That culture is what is going to remain and influence the people that work there. And so, but the individuals, those of us born again, and whether we're born again or not, we are influencing the culture where we work, and our habits make the culture. So, and first and foremost, companies are marketing culture, again, because the products and services, policies, all of that just flows out of the culture, but the culture is what will remain and truly influence people.
I feel like you're nailing it. I believe we've seen that at work in our culture. We've seen God just completely open up people's eyes to this. And it's not with one mention, of something. It's a day in, day out grind. It's almost like a second business to build, not just a nice, healthy culture where people like to come to work, but a God-centered, God-focused, God-missioned culture. I've seen that at work. In the book you wrote, The Christ-Centered Company, it says 37 biblical business habits to build a thriving company that honors God. Do you touch a lot on that? Like, is that a resource where, obviously I'd like to ask you, what's practical for someone to put in place? Do you touch a lot on that inside of the book?
Yeah, I'm a very practical guy. I know we've been talking about some, philosophical, theological concepts here, but the book is actionable habits. So there's 37 of them. And a lot of these you probably read about in Traction by Gino Wickman, the EOS framework and a lot of the other good not biblical, but business teaching books, right? But what really hasn't been presented, as far as I've seen, is a equally as comprehensive perspective on what is the biblical basis for doing those things. For example, having a target customer. I work with authors, and a lot of times I'll ask, who's this book for? An answer I get is, oh, this book's for everybody. and there's a lot of fear that is keeping people from being able to really just focus in on that one thing, that one, like what Jim Collins in Good to Great calls your hedgehog concept, that one thing that you're great at, that one group that you're going to really focus on and serve. And so Jesus did that. The woman comes to Jesus to get deliverance for her demon-possessed daughter. And Jesus says, I have come only for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And so this is a very specific ethnic group, but it was the people that were on the fringes of that society. And that's who Jesus sent his disciples out to go reach, was go only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. He says, who did he bring on his core team but the lost sheep of the house of Israel, And so I think there's a model that the Lord has set for it. Certainly Jesus' vision is for the whole world. I mean, God so loved the whole world, right? Not just the lost sheep of the house of Israel, but with the finite time that he had on this earth and the finite amount of places he could be at once, that's what he chose to focus on.
When I first started my own pressure washing business, I did not know what soft washing was, nor did I know marketing, sales, or even how to manage my finances.
Take the guesswork out of it. We have taken all of the knowledge we've gotten and wrapped it into video courses. It's a 7-figure blueprint for a pressure washing company that you can get at pressurewashingpastor.com. Go there, scroll down to video courses, and purchase it. We guarantee you'll get the value or your money back.
So go ahead and click pause, head over to the website. Now, unclick pause and back to your show. Yeah, let me do our listeners a favor. You have a very affordable mastermind that people can come into if they're interested in working on more ideas and more framework. And, you know, we'll get more into it at the end, but I just want to go ahead and make a quick ad inside the middle of this, is that if you're looking at working on your framework or changing your paradigm or getting more information, make sure you check out the links that we'll put inside the show and consider joining his mastermind. It's one of the best value-based masterminds I've ever seen. It's like a third of what sometimes you would spend on joining and what you get from the group. And so, Darren, I've got a question for you. I love your podcast. And you have some very creative entrepreneurs who use business as mission. Would you mind sharing a couple of them that you've had on your show, and share a little bit of how they use their business to further the mission, whether it's evangelism or discipleship?
Yeah. So I actually host 2 podcasts. One is the Theology of Business podcast. The other is the Christianity in Business podcast for Houston Christian University. And sometimes who I interviewed on which show is a little bit fuzzy to me. But one that I would encourage people to really take a look at is C12. So a lot of the examples that I share in the book come straight from C12 Companies. And C12 is the largest network of Christian executives and CEOs in the world. And so in the book, I didn't just want to give the teaching and explain what these habits are, but I wanted to give some actual examples that people could follow. And many of those come from C12 Companies, and many of those I've interviewed on the show as well. I'll just give an example of some of these purpose statements. I mean, this is not just what they talk about behind closed doors. This is what they put on their website and saying, this is what our company is about. Gulf Winds International is to glorify God by providing world-class logistics services through continual investment in our people, clients, community, and the world we live in. Four Rivers Smokehouse, it's another C12 company. We exist to use our God-given gifts to support the local community through exceptional products, steadfast customer service, and uncompromised integrity. And, it's interesting because I do ask more and more, I'm asking this question of what are the habits that you apply to be more Christ-centered in your approach to business. And that's really what I'm investigating. And how do you do this more broadly? We're talking about, giving, the financial aspect. I just interviewed Janet Ward Black, who has one of the largest women-owned law firms in the state of North Carolina. She's former Miss North Carolina, just an incredibly godly woman. And she started when they had a 1% profit margin. The Lord said, I want you to start tithing on your gross income for the business. So I'm more of an English guy, not a math guy. As I understand it, that they would be taking about a 9% hit off the top line, and they have just seen the Lord do incredible things. I mean, the firm has just exploded, one of the most influential firms in North Carolina, and just some of the things they do. Like one of the stories she shared, they wrote scripture verses all over the floor in a place that in their foyer where they were going to have it renovated. And then they took pictures of those scripture verses on the floor. And then if I'm remembering the story correctly, it's been a little bit, but then they put all of the woodwork and everything in there. And then they had taken pictures of all the verses on the floor. They turned it into a really high quality picture book and presented it to all the contractors that worked on the floor. So they would always know that those scriptures are underlying the actual physical work that they did. Just sending out, if somebody is going through a hard time, whether it's one of their clients or one of their team members or somebody just kind of in their community, they will start a 30-day, I can't remember what she called it, but 30 days of notes that they will physically mail to that person. So every time they go out to their mailbox, they're going to get another note of encouragement, in many cases, biblical encouragement as they're walking through the loss of that loved one or, whatever it is. Just one of the things I really learned from her is just that principle of going the extra mile for people. It's so easy to be just transactional and, it's like, I did enough. I delivered on what we said we were going to do. And sadly, that's not always done, but then delivering on what you said you were going to do, but then going the extra mile, like that's really what we're called to do as believers. So many of these Christian business owners just really challenged me in that.
Darren, when you don't exercise, you don't know the benefits and the mental clarity and all the fun stuff that comes from exercise, and or when you get out of exercising on a regular basis, you don't understand the benefits and the fruits that it can develop inside of your life. Why would someone want to be a minister in the marketplace? This is to the person who hasn't yet, who may be a Christian, who may be contemplating it. From this conversation, they're probably developing their own thought process as to the benefits, but elevator pitch, why would someone want to do this at all?
Yeah. I love the quote from Simon Sinek. He said, people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. So even if one of your main goals is to grow your business, which it is for many of us, I think as Christians, we should have the ultimate edge because the why behind what we do in business is so much greater and more eternal than any other why on the planet. So we have the greatest why, and it just will. I mean, your employees are going to enjoy their experience working with you, your coworkers, your bosses, wherever you are in the company. You're just going to bring that Joseph blessing to the PM, referring to Joseph, where everything he touched, the Lord blessed and it prospered. And I'm not saying that it's all going to be sunshine and roses. You're not going to have, struggles in the business. But I think the biggest thing is that why you're doing what you're doing, and that why behind what you do should just propel you into God's best for you and what you manage.
I like it. I think you did a good job with that. I listened to a podcast on some video game creators. Do you recall the episode I'm thinking about?
Yeah.
Can you
Yes.
share a little bit of the creativity that these business owners have as it relates to evangelism and discipleship? Yeah.
Yeah. You're talking about Gravity Jack, and this. I mean, they're on Start Engine now. Actually, I think they've only got like 5 days left of their campaign, but they're raising money to build this AI-based game, kind of like a next generation of Pokemon Go, if you remember when that came out, but where you're playing the game in real time, where you're holding up your phone and you're able to see things around you that can only be seen through your mobile device. But they have this, it's called War Tribe of Benjamin. And their ultimate vision is that this game is played all around the world, and that in the process of playing this game, you are answering questions, you're solving challenges, but you're writing, you're typing out. And so in these countries where there's extreme poverty, they still have phones in many cases, and they're giving these people an opportunity to make money by playing the game. And in so doing, they are creating, they are digitizing the translations of all of these languages that, I mean, we haven't even just cracked the surface of. I mean, there's like, just in like, we have some missionaries from our church that are out in like Papua New Guinea, places like this. There's just, I mean, I don't even know how many languages, far more than you would expect. And all of these people are going to be able to have their own language on the internet, whereas now they have to, they're limited by what information they can get based on, if they know English, but to be able to use this game to help people make money who are in these impoverished nations, but from a kingdom redemptive purpose.
Yeah. And then there's so many languages that haven't been translated into the Bible. I think that's also a wing of their processing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah. So with AI,
so they're partnering up with Wycliffe Bible translators to use these translations that are happening through the game, so that they can then use that for translating the Bible.
That's cool.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So if you kept your mission inside the local church, you would never have the opportunity to reach all the nations in a way that a business can reach people all over the globe.
That's so good. That's super true.
Yeah. And so we might have time for maybe a couple of habits from the book, the 37. I can't believe how much time we've already been on. But if you're just to pick a couple of habits from the 37, what are a couple that you would challenge our listeners to maybe consider to adding into their company culture?
Yeah. One of them is just this habit of focusing more on getting better rather than getting bigger. And so we have all these 37. You can go and evaluate your own company, regardless of whether you're the CEO or not, through this assessment. If you go to theologyofbusiness.com, just go to the assessments tab and you'll find it. But just think about this, rate your company on this statement. Our company focuses on maximizing and fulfilling our current production capacity rather than focusing obsessively on growth and expansion. In Zechariah 4:10, the old men of Israel, it says that they wept when they saw the scale of the new temple in comparison to Solomon's temple. And Zechariah prophesies, who has shown contempt for the day of small things. This is a principle that we see in Matthew 25, the parable of the talents. You were faithful with a few things, I will put you in charge of many things. So it's just the principle and really the habit of disciplining yourself to not go after the bright, shiny objects that are all around us, and really focus on what is that main thing. Keep that main thing the main thing. Yeah. Jim Collins said, not one of the good to great companies focused obsessively on growth in their study. And there's a great story from Truett Cathy where his board, they were really kind of pressuring him like, hey, this is in the early days of Chick-fil-A, and Boston Market, which I think was called Boston Chicken at the time. They were just aggressively expanding. A lot of people don't know who Boston Market is. I assume they're still in business. We don't have them around here, but they were saying, we gotta expand. We gotta go borrow some more money, start building more stores. And Truett Cathy walks into this meeting. Steve Robinson, actually, he was the chief marketing officer. He was sharing this with me because I had heard the story a little bit different, but he clarified. The story was that Truett Cathy slammed his fist down on the table and said, "Gentlemen, we got to get better before we get bigger." And Steve Robinson said, first of all, Truett Cathy would never slam his fist down on a table. This man was a gentleman. But he did say, slow down. I want to get out of debt. And so, you can just really fall into a trap of, we got to go borrow more money. And it can just really get you into trouble if you don't adopt this habit of, you know what, we're going to focus on maximizing our capacity and then watch the Lord expand us from that point. So I find that one often resonates.
Man, that's so on time.
Yeah,
that's so good.
One of the things that we did, so we are Traction fans, and so I did what's called a
VTO.
Yeah, a vision document where you understand if you're on Traction. And when we were writing out the distinctions or your uniqueness, one of them is who you hire. And we have always tried to hire great people, give them satisfying work and pay them well. That was like 5-6 years ago. And now we've shifted a definition on greatness. So if we're saying hire great people, well, what is our definition of a great person? And so if a business owner has to make a decision, how do we hire somebody? You have to have a decision filter. And one of our decision filters, and I'd say it's a big one, is that they want to make an impact while making an income. Mm-hmm. I don't want to bring somebody onto the company if they don't have those two cores and connected with their framework, where it's like, hey, I'm not just here for me, I'm also here to make a difference for others. And so that was one of the key, okay, as we scale this thing out, open up in other cities, how do we teach that across the board of the decisions we make? Great people care about impact while making an income.
Yeah. So. And I feel like the sentiment behind getting better before you get bigger, all the episodes that we've been filming lately have all been about scaling your time horizon back, and it doesn't have to all be done in 2 to 4 years if you're really dedicated to a 30-year vision or beyond. When you're, dead and gone, you want this thing to still continue. Get better before you get bigger. Like that's what a lot of the conversations, all this is so on time, man.
Yeah. Darren, we're about to wrap this up. Is your wife the type of, I'm assuming you're married, you got 3 kids, 4 kids or 3 kids?
3 kids. Yeah.
Yep. Is she the type of person that would be on a podcast with you if we ended up coming in and doing a series on couples and faith and what all that looks like?
100%.
Yeah. And so
she's a much better talker than I am. And she's a much better looker than I am too.
That might help our click rate.
Excellent.
We need some clickbait because we ain't got nothing right now. So, so thank you so much for being on the show. If folks are interested in finding out more about you, would you mind again sharing with them where they can find more information on how they can get in touch with what you do?
Yeah. If you're interested in publishing a book, go to highbridgebooks.com. And if you're interested in taking this assessment and exploring more about what it means to partner with God in business and to explore and apply God's will for business, go to theologyofbusiness.com.
I love that. I do want to give you another little plug here. Darren has written 3 awesome books. If you've been inspired by this episode or you know someone who would be inspired by it, send them the Audible links if it's on Audible. And if not, I'm sure that you can get the books on Amazon. But The Christ-Centered Company, The Marketplace Christian, and Marketing Like Jesus. I think there's a lot of applicable tools in there that people who were inspired by this discussion could really benefit from.
Yeah. And Darren, until next time.
Peace.